This is Dusk, a retro first-person shooter developed by David Szymanski and published by New Board Interactive in 2018 for Windows and later on for Mac, Linux and Nintendo Switch. Dusk was heavily inspired by other popular 90s games like Quake, Doom, Half-Life, Stalker and etc. With the movement mechanics focused around replicating the feel of Quake with the bunny hopping and strafing, which has been simplified in Dusk, so you don't have to be a CSGO global elite in order to perform those tricks. One thing that I have to mention before diving into the mechanics is the music, which has been perfectly crafted by Andrew Hoshot. If that name sounds familiar to you, that is because he also worked on the music for Quake Champions and Doom Eternal, to name a few. It absolutely captures the feel of a 90s soundtrack, going balls to the wall when in action, and returning to a subtle background music when it's over. So you can easily identify if you have more enemies left to kill, or you can take a breather after a chaotic fight, barely escaping with your life. Now let's look at the gameplay. The movement is easy to pick up in a few minutes just by playing the game, and with bunny hopping being so simplified, even my 5-year-old nephew could handle it. If you're playing on the easier difficulties, then you probably won't even need to use the spacebar, but if you're playing on the harder difficulties, then bunny hopping will become your new companion throughout the game. I would highly recommend playing this game on Zero Miedo or Duskmare. On Zero Miedo, the enemies just do more damage while you do less, but on Duskmare you die in just one hit, making it so hard that you will be quick saving right before every corner. On my first playthrough I played on Duskmare, and boy, let me tell you, I died a lot. But at the same time, it was so gratifying knowing I beat this level without being hit once. Despite all their efforts, I came up on top with not even a scratch, conquering the movements and shooting mechanics to such a degree that you can take down literal creations of a god without taking damage. On the harder difficulties, you come to realize that every weapon has its own purpose. The pistols to dispose of early game and low health enemies, the shotguns to take care of those that get within 2 meters from you without wearing a mask, the assault rifle to gun down a large horde of enemies all trying to take you down, the hunting rifle to snipe away the rust roof campers, and the explosives to satisfyingly paint the room with the organs of those trying to stop you in your journey. The game has 18 lesser enemies and 13 bosses that you will have to fight while trying to find the key to the right door to progress. Or do you? What if you could run past all the enemies and ignore the bosses while making your way to the exit and going to the next level? Up until the end, you can completely skip every single enemy and boss fight in the game if you know where the exit is and how to get there. Before I get into the plot, I would like to say that this is purely my own take on the plot for Dusk. The plot in the game is vague on purpose, so without a clear storyline and with different takes on the story online, I couldn't make nor find a definitive plot, so this is how I interpreted the story. Dusk is set in a fictional rural town of Dusk, Pennsylvania, where a huge network of Lovecraftian runes has been discovered. And because the game is set in America, the runes attract the attention of the government, which mobilized military personnel and scientists to the farmland to establish research labs and facilities to try and harness the secrets of the runes. But the runes were too powerful for them to harness. When they realized what they'd uncovered, they tried to shut down the operation and wall in the farmlands to contain the spread of its powers, but it was too late. The government personnel, the farmers, the citizen, and the livestock surrounding the uncovered ruins were all possessed by the Crystals of Madness, as they're called. A cult was formed worshipping the Lovecraftian outer god, also known as Crawling Chaos, Nyarlathotep. That's a mouthful. With a mysterious figure as the leader of the cult, directly under the outer god in terms of authority in the cult. The cult spreads throughout the facilities, farms, factories, mines, and the town of Dusk, making new buildings and contraptions in order to inherit the blessing of the outer god and gain unimaginable powers. This is when we're introduced to the main protagonist, Dusk Dude, who I'll be calling the player for simplicity's sake. The player is a treasure hunter who used to live in the town with his family, who have tragically passed away. He went out on a treasure hunt before the ruins were discovered and came back sometime after the cult took over the town and the land surrounding it. In the prequel of Dusk, Dusk 82, there is some lore that helps us understand how the player got in the predicament of the first level. You enter the woods of Dusk, but something is wrong. Monsters are everywhere. You wonder what could have possibly happened to this town. Something's gone wrong. You see a metal sign with a single unmistakable word on it. Minefield. The military must be here. But surely they could have contained this threat by now. Has something gone wrong? Up ahead you see an exit and a dense forest beyond. A fireball washes past you, narrowly missing your head and singeing your beard. Strange figures in white robes dart among the trees, conjuring fire out of thin air. You grimace. Magic or not, if it bleeds you can kill it. An impossible number of chainsaw-wielding maniacs greet you as you enter a nearby building. Your eyes dart around the room. Whoever designed this building must have been a madman, but you feel that you're becoming a little mad too. You make your way to an abandoned factory overgrown with trees. The abandoned facility is much larger than you thought. You enter a vast courtyard, littered with collapsing buildings and scraggly trees. There is no time to look around, however, as the howl of the monstrous goats and the crackle of the unholy fire fill the open air. You enter a sinister high-tech lab. What were they doing here? More importantly, how are you going to find your way through? Against all odds, you manage to escape near death and the impossible trap, only to find yourself in another. But this time, you want to despair. You know that you can get out of any trap now, no matter how complex or nonsensical. As you defeat the last obstacle separating you and freedom, you hear the shuffling of footsteps and a blow to the back of your head knocking you to the ground. A strange voice growls. Take him to the basement. I have a special death planned for this one. The world around you fades, and you realize this is not the end. This is only the beginning. From what I could gather, as the player was returning to his hometown, he sensed that something is wrong. He couldn't figure out what until it was too late to leave. He had been forced into a maze of traps purely for the entertainment of the outer god, but as the cult leader had become impatient and tired waiting for the player to die while killing countless of his minions, he stepped out and knocked you out, while instructing the chainsaw wielders to take your body to the basement, as he has a plan on how to deal with you. The game starts right after the player has gotten off the meat hooks that he was pierced on. You take control of the player after he's grabbed the sickles that were on the ground next to him, and you hear the mysterious voice that knocked you out saying, "Kill the intruder," and 3 leathernecks rushing you to kill you. After defeating the leathernecks, who appear to have a potato bag on their head with only holes for them to see through, and their overalls being completely stained in blood, since they're probably responsible for most of the killing and labor throughout the story. You next encounter the mages and the possessed goats. The mages have their cult logo painted on their white muddy robes, which look like the robes which the KKK are known for, while the possessed goats have an exposed bloody ribcage and innards with glowing red eyes. The way the goats attack the player seems to be by spitting their own blood at you. After defeating all the enemies in the basement and outside the house, you find a path towards a farm half a mile away. With no way back, you continue on forward. On the farm, you're officially introduced to 2 new enemies, the Scarecrow and the Rats. The Scarecrows appear either hung up on a pole or on the move like the other enemies. They have blood all over their body, which could imply that they're not normal scarecrows full of straw, but instead a possessed human that has been hung up on the poles, tortured by the other possessed, and dressed in a scarecrow outfit to catch the outsiders and non-believers off guard. The rats have 50 HP and barely do any damage, but on the Duskmare difficulty the rat is an enemy you constantly need to be on the lookout for. Most commonly placed right around a corner or in a large horde of rats, but most of the time you'd be able to react to them because of their unique screech. This is also the first time you see a part of the government personnel, evidently hung upside down from a sign with Sinner right next to the body, but it still proves that the government is somehow a part of this. This level also has a secret room so broken that it makes the rest of chapter 1 a cakewalk, but I'll leave that for you to find. After finding the key to the shack and going through the tunnel, you arrive at the Church of Dusk. Previously a church worshipping Christianity, but you can find the crucifix on the ground of where it once stood high on the wall, being replaced by the sound of the cultists. Next to the fallen crucifix, you see a hole in the ground leading to what looks like a medieval tomb. As you progress through the level, you sink deeper into the ground and you soon encounter your first boss. the Intoxicator. I don't think this one has much of a meaning except being a drunk alligator and the devs thinking it was funny. After you defeat the boss, you unlock the last door of the level, which leads to the sewers, where you can find your way back to the ground. Making your way up, you find yourself in a mining site. This mining site is where the crystals of madness are being excavated. Once the level starts, the player needs to make his way through the enemies and find the key that will unlock the exit. Once the player finds the key in an abandoned cavern that seems to have been used to mine the crystals that have corroded everyone's minds, he is able to unlock the final door to the level. Except that you're introduced to a new enemy, the Fork Maiden, which appears as reanimated corpses of women, possibly reanimated through the power of the crystals. The cult could have mass reanimated dead women in a graveyard, or the woman that refused to join the cult in a last attempt to recruit more minions under the leader's command before burning the failed attempts. After defeating them, you make your way to the Cuddy Mines. As you make your way through the mines, you notice that there is no crystals left from the mining expedition. They've all been harvested. What use could so many crystals have when most of the time is already completely corroded with their power? When you finally kill all the enemies, you find a way out, the way to the surface. On the surface is where a cultist camp is located, and in the roof of the house at the edge of the map you find mages performing a ritual that is cut short with an explosive entrance from the player. You make your way through the enemies and end up going down a well, then being teleported into an ambush. You easily kill everyone because you're a gold nova in CSGO and make your way to the teleporter to the Sanctum of the Worthy, where the second boss fight awaits you. The twin giant cultists that are just larger version of the normal cultists. After disposing them by strafing and bunny hopping like this is a Quake lobby, you go through the exit and find yourself in an excavation pit. After you escape the excavation pit, you find yourself in a building. Opening the garage door on one of the walls, then you find buildings completely controlled by the possessed. But then you find military personnel that up until this point you could only fight dead, scattered around the levels. The soldiers are extremely weak compared to the other enemies, so no wonder they've become corroded. Even the mages were twice as strong compared to the soldiers, and they're one of the weakest enemies in the game. That just shows how little of a chance the government personnel had to survive. After killing the soldiers, you flip a switch that opens the gate to the exit, but you find soldiers, leathernecks, mages and scarecrows fighting each other. And you can also see in the distance Dusk town, but it's fenced up by the military. With having to find another way, you go through the sewers once again and find yourself in an alleyway in the town. While making your way through the town, which feels like a maze, you get ambushed. This time there are a lot more enemies than the previous ambush. Could the Outer God have told the cult leader to prepare, or did the cult leader already know that you were going to come to the city as you had no way of going back? But this ambush is still not enough to stop the player. As you finish off the last enemies, you get the key and make your way to the elevator, which leads to an underground facility. After the cult leader asks you,
"Are you prepared for what's next?"
you then notice a lot of ammo and resources scattered around. This is a giant red flag in any game that there's a boss fight coming. After flicking the switch and making your way down the stairs, you notice a new enemy is introduced, the scientists. The scientists appear normal compared to the others, with their clothes being completely intact but having what seems to be a metal guard over their mouth, eyes and over their forehead leading to the back of the head. They attack you with a giant syringe filled with an unknown substance. They're also responsible for most of the non-human enemies that the player will encounter in Chapter 2. Defeating the scientist and the lone soldier, you notice a bloody writing on the floor in front of the giant door in the middle of the room. What did we create? It seems that the scientists, under the influence of the crystals or possibly even the Outer God, against their will created abominations against humanity before completely losing their mind to the erosion. Unlocking the gate to the quarantine release button with no other way out, you press it. Then the door in the middle of the room opens and you're immediately met with the final boss of Chapter 1, the Experiment. It emits and shoots fireballs at the player, which if not careful can quickly kill you. Except that you can just camp on top of the stairs and hide when he's firing the fireballs. Killing the Experiment, you see 6 buttons on the wall where the creature was kept. You get closer to it to try and figure out the combination, but after a single press you're met with another Experiment, this time with 2000 less health, an inferior Experiment compared to the first one. After defeating it, you go through the bloody tunnel where those creatures once stood in, and you make your way to the second chapter. After the chapter ends, you're met with an ending screen which reads, "The meat hook wounds in your back still throb as you make your way down the cold, black, bloody hallways that once held these monstrous creatures. You leave the ruined town of Dusk behind, littered with the corpses of the possessed, hoping never to return. In the distance stand imposing silhouettes of what appears to be military facilities. But why? A dark voice pushes you forward. Do you truly seek answers, or is it simply too late to turn back? And with that, you enter chapter 2. As you pass through the gates that are somehow locked, the player gets completely stripped of his weapons for no apparent reason. I'm guessing because the levels would be too easy with the secret guns from the farm. Anyway, immediately you're introduced to a new enemy that has somehow spotted you from across the map that I like to call the Pyrocynical. If you don't get the reference, good for you. You don't need to know. His actual name is the Welder, because he's seen wearing a welder's mask and is using a flamethrower. At the end of the level, you're also introduced to the ground wizards. I mean, they're just bigger wizards that now throw homing firebows. After escaping the facility, you find yourself in a man-made tunnel. But something's off about this place. It's unnaturally quiet. No enemy sounds, no background soundtrack. You're left with the sounds of the machines sparking, and that's it. Further down the tunnel, you found yourself in a room with "Don't Go in the Ruins" written on the wall, and next to it, a locked door leading to the ruins themselves. With no other way out, you get the key, unlock the door, and go down the ladder, and find a hole boarded up with caution tape. Or something that looks like caution tape, which can only mean that the dead soldiers seen previously have tried to seal off the area, but evidently failed, which resulted in their deaths. Behind the caution tape is what looks like an old prison built specifically to hold the experiments of the scientists. As you proceed further down the hall, your flashlight flickers. You hear a heavy breath to your right, and on the wall is written in blood, "Don't rest your eyes." And as you turn around, you hear an enemy approaching, but there is no one there. You see blood on the ground coming closer to you, so you shoot. And that's when the Wendigo is introduced. The Wendigo has deer antlers, no skin on their head, open rib cages, and red eyes. It's not clear what they're supposed to be, but that just adds on to the horror of the unknown. As you make your way out of the basement, you find out that you're in a walled-off factory of some sort that has been transformed by the possessed. You make your way through the level and end up falling down a vent that seems to be used for transporting blood and organs. As you land from the fall, your flashlight breaks, forced to navigate through the darkness with only the light of your gunfire until you find a working replacement. Sometime later you find yourself in what seems to be a giant facility full of grinders. But what could they need such a contraption, and what looked like human sacrifices for? Well, by the end of the chapter, our question is gonna find its answer. Escaping the infernal machine, you find yourself in the Escher Labs. The Escher Labs was a research facility transformed into an experiment chamber to create unholy creatures by the scientists. Later in the level, you see Wendigos in a chamber together with a lot of mad scientists. The scientists are pushing the limits of the facility and the laws of nature with the help of the Outer God. As a player progresses through the level, the labs begin to change right in front of your eyes. The rooms that you previously came from have new pathways. You can't tell left from right, up from down, right from wrong. Reality as you know it is changing. At the end of the level, you're teleported inside the ribcage of a giant creature with nauseating sound playing in the background. Getting out of the lab, you go into the Erebus reactor. The Erebus reactor is a nuclear power plant that was walled in like Chernobyl with a giant cube surrounding it, modified by the possessed to create some form of energy to power the research labs and all the other facilities. But as there are giant cracks on the ground surrounding it, it's clear that it's been overloaded and it's about to collapse. Racing against time, the player makes his way out of the building and finally sees the giant cubicle enclosure that the reactor is in. Opening the roof, and a floating structure with a giant elevator is revealed. Just about to leave the level, and you're met with my favorite enemy in the game, Big John. Big John is the leader of the military soldiers that we've been seeing throughout the levels. But Big John is twice as big and a lot tougher than the normal soldiers. He also keeps shouting "kill me," almost like his old self is still conscious, but his body won't listen to him, and is urging the player to put him out of his misery.
Come on, kill me! Come on, kill me! Good job! Do it now! Girly man! Come on! Kill me!
Defeating Big John, you jump up the elevator and go into New Babel. New Babel is the floating structure that you saw from the ground, held up by beams thousands of meters in the air. Reality is becoming more and more twisted. The more the player progresses, the less logic the buildings around him have. The deeper in he sinks, the more mad he becomes, together with the world around him. As the quote at the start said, whoever designed this building must have been a madman, but you feel that you're becoming a little mad too. The Outer God is starting to influence the player's mind and the reality surrounding him. In the graphic novel for Dusk, there is a few panels that could also explain it. If you want to be swayed by my miracles, perhaps I will fail you with my medicine. I cannot break your body, that is clear, but your mind is an open wound. I have given you our eyes. Do you see? Do you see? Do you see? You see it too, don't you? I have done it. I've hurt you. The player's mind could be becoming more and more corroded the longer he spends fighting the creatures that the Outer God and the cult leader sent out to him. But this also shows that they're becoming more desperate and uneasy seeing how far you've come, not pulling any stops in an attempt to halt you. Later on in the level, on the walls can be seen, the ruins held knowledge. We sold our souls for it. Altars built of concrete, fed with blood and bone. This seems to be written by a person who wasn't fully corroded yet, but soon would be. They apparently knew what the ruins were, but still chose to proceed with whatever they were doing, leading to this situation. Then after those writings, the player finally sees what the human parts are being used for. They're extracting energy from them, but sending them where exactly? You finally find out the answer to your question. The human parts, the giant grinders, the nuclear reactor, it's all being used for one purpose, to power a portal that leads to the dimension where both the cult leader and the Outer God reside in. But before you can get in it, you're presented with your final enemy of the chapter, the Guardian. Its physical appearance implies that he's another experiment from the mad scientist, a monster specifically made for one thing, to guard the portal to the other dimension, to make sure no one comes in and out of it. Defeat it and you leave Earth by entering the portal. After the level ends, you're met with an ending screen for the chapter. As you step into the unholy portal powered by ungodly means, there is no doubt what you must do. Hubris and fanaticism have woken something powerful, horrible beyond anything you can imagine. You must uncover the truth. Who knows what nightmares await you in the Nameless city. That concludes Chapter 2 and introduces Chapter 3, the Nameless City. The Nameless City is an unexplainable dimension that has several individual small worlds which all serve a specific purpose to the Outer God, that are all connected through some kind of a wormhole. One small world contains an iron cathedral carved into a mountain wall, with the core of the mountain being filled with lava while the surface is overrun with snow. Another has a small village with churches, pubs and inns for the possessed creatures, leading to the surface once again where another church is located, and end up on a version of Earth that has been completely destroyed by the cult. The next small world is a flashback of the player's house before he went to treasure hunt, and before the cult took over the town. Navigating your way through the islands and the gravity changes, when you enter the player's house, he says, "How can I be here?" After that you can hear a fire and screaming in the background. Interacting with the pictures on the walls, it just says it hurts to remember. This helps us understand that the player's family had died in a house fire, but the player was helpless. He couldn't save his family before it was too late. With the Outer God deeming you worthy, you proceed on to the next level where you have to reverse the unfolded events. Starting from the cathedral when you first entered the dimension, leading to the facilities of the second chapter, and ending where it all began, on the meat hooks of the first chapter. The level ends once the player completes the cycle and pierces himself on the hooks. You're transported into another small world where you have to fight against every enemy you've been fighting against in the past 3 chapters, from the first enemy you've encountered in chapter 1 to the last in chapter 3. Once you've defeated all, you can use the newly revealed portal and reach the final level of Dusk. You are teleported to a small restricted area with a portal in the middle. This final level reveals the answer to our first question from the beginning. What could they be using so many crystals for? They're using the crystals to open a portal leading to the final challenge from the Outer God. After gathering the 3 crystal types, placing them in front of the portal and going through it, you arrive in a circular room with only one person in it. The mysterious cult leader that has been talking to the player throughout the game. The same figure that knocked you out at the start. You've come a full circle.
At last. You finally arrived. You shall be my final test.
The final challenge is to kill him and escape this hell. What you would immediately notice is that he not only looks human, but also acts like one. He moves and shoots exactly like you, raping and bunny hopping while quick switching between the same weapons that you have, the pistols, shotguns, the rifle, and the explosives. Is this how he got acknowledged by the Outer God? After the fight begins, you put everything you've learned to the final test. After almost killing Jacob, leaving him at 500 health, the Outer God deems him unworthy and sends Jacob's own apostles to finish him off.
No, you can't betray me. My disciples!
After he is killed, a secret door opens with a staircase leading to freedom. You see the light at the end of the tunnel. All the slaughter has finally stopped. Except that it hasn't. The staircase breaks right under your feet and you fall into the darkness, while for the first time in the game, the Outer God directly talks to you.
He was worthy, you know, and he accomplished so much. But then, you came along. You who were stronger. You who were faster. You I like better. Who did you expect at the end of all of this? God? The devil, perhaps? No, it's just me.
The actual final challenge was not the cult leader Jacob, but the Outer God himself. You were placed on 2 giant platforms with the Outer God popping out in front of you. The final task of the game is to kill the god that has started it all. At first, he's invincible to bullets and explosives in the darkness, but when he hits the platform, he also cracks the ceiling. Kill it and a light will come in to temporarily weaken him so bullets and explosives can affect him. You will have to break open 5 holes in the ceiling for him to get down on his last health points. But just as you're about to defeat him, he paralyzes you and deems you worthy of inheriting his power and becoming his new puppet just like Jacob was until he was deemed unworthy.
Enough! You are indeed worthy, and so now my power is yours. How does it feel? Horrible, isn't it? But wonderful, yes. Who you were before is insignificant. Who you are now is inconceivable. But here you shall remain till I have need of you again. For one must always reign beneath Dusk.
And with that, we finally reached the end of Dusk. Dusk is honestly an amazing game, and if you like games like Doom, you'll definitely love it as well. It doesn't have a high replay value, except if you're an achievement junkie and you need to 100% all 33 levels. Then you could easily spend between 70 to 100 hours on the game. Before Dusk I wasn't really interested in retro shooters, or just normal shooting simulators, and I haven't even finished Doom Eternal yet, because the way Doom tells its story, it just isn't my cup of tea. But Dusk told its story through the environment and the enemies you fought against. It kept me asking for more information about what happened to this town. What's the player's role in this city of slaughter? Why and how are there high-tech labs considering the possessed seem basically to be zombies commanded by a person, and so on. This game is fantastic and I hope it gets the recognition it really deserves. There have people who've thought about playing it to actually play it, but I'm pretty sure this low quality review will have the opposite effect. But it's not like anyone is gonna make it past the 30-second mark, so why does it matter? The final review of the game, I give it 9 scarecrows out of 10.